Now, before we go any further, let's all agree that context is extremely important. Depending on the context of the word being used in a sentence, it will heavily influence which definition one should use. As you see from these definitions, depending on context, we can use this word to describe concepts in the spiritual, physical, or even the fictional realms. No wonder we get so confused. What makes matters worse is that not everyone has a copy of this dictionary. There are other dictionaries out there that have very different definitions. It's no wonder that despite all the tools at our disposal, we all struggle greatly in communicating simple concepts to one another. I want to spend some time on this one word, for it explains so well the problem we face with the fictional realm and steps we can take to diffuse the confusion. The etymology of the word comes from the Latin word persona, which is defined as a mask, which fits what my Oxford Dictionary said. For hundreds of years, the word person was a reference to a mask or the character in a play. The word person was not a reference to the actor at all, but rather the mask that they wore. So in this context, person was a reference to a concept within the fictional realm to describe what people were doing when telling stories, nothing more. Masks had been used for thousands of years in almost every culture. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt used masks all the time to represent the gods. They would put the god's mask on, and any words that they spoke would then be viewed as if the god himself were speaking those words. Once they took the mask off, then any words spoken by the pharaoh would be his or her own words. The Romans also had a huge affinity for masks that represented those who passed on. What if this behavior has continued throughout ancient times to this very day? Is it possible that is the actual premise behind calling legislation an act, is to let people know that the king is just acting and any words uttered by them is to be viewed as if the king, parenthetically God, spoke those words? Is it possible that these acts only apply to the actors acting in the fictional realm? I suggest that the only reason acts have force and effect in the physical realm is because people participate in the fictional realm without being consciously aware of the difference, and then manifest it into the physical realm through their own actions. They don't recognize that they are wearing masks when they act out their role. The third definition of person above references the legal definition and introduces us to two concepts: natural person and artificial person. We must be careful here because this definition is from an English dictionary, but when we start talking about words in the legal system, that system has their own dictionary. They define their own words, hence further confusion and communication challenges. The legal system words look like English, but it's not English. It's rather legalese. If we want to communicate with the legal system, we must be very careful to ensure that we learn the language and use the correct definitions of words to ensure that they comprehend what we are talking about, and more importantly, we comprehend what they are saying. This is a process that the vast majority of us fail to do, not because of our lack of effort, but due to the highly technical training required to fully comprehend how the system works. This is where my point really becomes clear. Now we're accessing multiple sources for word definitions. The Canadian Interpretation Act, RSC 1985, CI 21, defines a person as being a person or any word or expression descriptive of a person, includes a corporation. Now, does this describe a corporation or does it describe the human being, or both? There are many researchers out there that would suggest that this legal definition of person defines the corporation only. That conclusion is based on the definition of the word includes. This is a very common word where most people get it wrong. I found out a few years ago that I've been using it wrong for most of my life. The word includes is not to add to, but rather to shut or close in. To shut up, to confine. Oxford Unabridged Dictionary, 1958. There are even legal maxims in court cases to support this interpretation. Inclusio unius est exclusio alterius. The inclusion of one is the exclusion of all others. What that really means is that when you use the word includes to define a word, it means this and nothing more. When we utilize critical thinking, we are forced to conclude that the Interpretation Act has defined the word person to define corporations. Where do we fit in, and why does this have to be so complex? The implications of doing this type of research into definitions of words is profound yet disturbing. If one was to extend their critical thinking to encompass all that we are, is this exercise really getting to the root of the problem? I think this is a complete distraction from the truth. Even in Meads versus Meads, 2012, ABQB 571, Justice Rook alluded to the truth when he stated in paragraph 30 of his ruling, "I'm going to let someone else deal with your living soul. I'm just going to deal with your person." Justice Rook made it clear that he does not have jurisdiction over the spiritual realm, but instead has jurisdiction over the person, parenthetically, fictional realm. A key hint to our freedoms that I will share later. When he talks about person, most of us think he's talking about the physical body, but I suggest that he in fact only has jurisdiction within the fictional realm. The only reason he gets jurisdiction in the physical realm is because the individual did not comprehend the full scope and meaning of the words or who he was. This brings me to Oxford's third definition of person, the living body of a human being, either A, the actual body as distinct from clothing, etc., or from the mind or soul. For this is, in my opinion, the whole problem with the fictional realm and how words are defined. To view our body without the mind or soul and call it a person could be extremely problematic if most individuals are not aware of the distinction. The people acting as judges depend on this confusion. We have become so lost in the fictional realm that we have forgotten who we are. We are so ignorant of the meaning of words that we fall prey to those who use that against us. Are we just a body without a mind or soul? Of course not. But how do we account for our mind or our soul in our language? Why are we using words to describe just the body without taking our mind and soul into consideration? Why are we letting others reference and take jurisdiction over our body with no regard to all that we are? Corporation is another word. The problem goes even deeper than the word person. I see millions of people marching the streets protesting against corporate greed, government corruption, and police brutality. Are these issues actually a reflection of the people working for these institutions rather than the institutions themselves? What is a corporation or a government really? The etymology of the word corporation comes from the word corpus, which is a dead body. Corporations are nothing more than a construct of our minds, of which the details have been written down on pieces of paper. Because a corporation has no life, it is a dead body, and it needs a living man to speak for it. If you read Blackstone's commentaries, a treatise written by Sir William Blackstone, 1723 to 1780, to explain the laws of England, you will find that the lawyer's primary function was to speak for these dead bodies because they are not alive, and as such they cannot speak. The whole idea was that those who are living can present themselves. As such, they did not need a lawyer to represent them because they have a living body and are able to speak for themselves. So why do we need these dead bodies? The idea of organizing people in a top-down pyramid command and control structure, aka business, was first put into practice by the Roman Catholic Church. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Yes, the people in the church were the ones that invented the concept of a corporation. Why? Well, years ago, kings and popes had a problem. When they died, their estates would be locked up for years, and the new king or the new pope was stuck with the duty of governing without the resources from the previous ruler. They could not access the resources of the previous ruler until the estate was cleared. It was very difficult to rule without it. So they created the concept of a corporation that can own property. They then transferred all the king's or pope's property into the corporation and made them the CEO. It's much easier to change the executive of the corporation than to put all the property through the long and laborious probate process. This resulted in an interesting effect. Does anybody remember when we were taught the power of compound interest in school? How many of us thought, how great would it be if I could live to be 400 years old? Imagine how rich one would be if they could have compound interest compiling for 400 years. Well, holding property in a body that doesn't die has this very same result which created other challenges for the king or the pope. Over hundreds of years, they ended up with empires that grew very large. The larger the empire, the more help they needed to govern, command, and control. As such, they needed help. What better way to rule a kingdom than through the loyalty of others? Those individuals were more than happy to swear allegiance to their master in exchange for power, wealth, and control. What better way to control all the wealth, land, property, and people than to organize it all under a single entity, the corporation? The challenge was to get everyone else to see the corporation as an actual entity so that everyone would respect it and honor it. After all, what is the sense in putting all your wealth, power, and control into an idea when others don't respect or even recognize the idea? So the kings at the time passed laws within their own kingdoms to give force and effect of these entities. Entities that were created out of thin air were created by the mandate of the king, which they called a charter. These actions are nothing more than elaborate constructs for our minds so that we will believe and see what the king wants us to see. The king needed us to follow along with his plan.